In today's video, we will cover the full story of one of the most heartbreaking alligator attacks in history. Be sure to watch until the end because it gets worse as time goes on. It was around 11 a.m. on Saturday when the Hillsborough County Fire and Medical Services got a call. The caller stated that there was a lady in the water and something big was attacking her. The woman's name was Julia Banks, a loving mother and the owner of a wildlife rehabilitation center called Animal Quest in Clearwater Springs, Florida. Julia was known for taking care of injured birds, mostly ospreys. But at some point, she expanded her business. She started rescuing and raising all kinds of wild animals, including alligators. She kept them in a big pond behind her house and would often post videos of her swimming with them online. Today's video is about one of those alligators. His name was Reef, and he was the biggest problem Julia ever encountered. In this picture, you can see just how big Reef was. Julia found Reef in April 2018. At the time, he was just a tiny hatchling, probably less than a day old, near a road close to her home. Since nobody had been in the vicinity, Julia assumed the baby gator must have been abandoned. So she took him home and raised him herself. She fed him every 3 hours and even slept with him in her bed. Julia knew she wasn't supposed to raise Reef as a pet, but she said to herself that she would return him to the wild once he grew up a little. In the meantime, she enjoyed the benefits of having such a cool pet, including the fact that Reef loved to swim with her in her pool. Here they are in one of their favorite spots. Julia said that she and Reef had a special bond that couldn't be broken. Unfortunately, that turned out to be false. After seeing Julia's social media posts, many people felt uncomfortable. For example, here she is holding Reef by the tail and swinging him around. Clearly, Reef is uncomfortable being in this position. And then there's this video where Reef is biting and harassing a blue heron. The poor bird can barely defend itself. It's trying to take off, but Reef won't let it. Julia finds it hilarious, but it's pretty disgusting to watch. You can tell by the look on the bird's face that it's traumatized. There are so many more videos like this, and they all show how dangerous Reef was. Julia should have returned him to the wild long before she did, if she ever did. People would often leave messages on her social media telling her to let Reef go, but she didn't listen to them. Instead, she continued to exploit Reef for views. As you can imagine, Reef grew bigger and bigger over the years. When Julia found him, he was only a few inches long, but by 2023, he was almost 8 feet long and weighed over 300 pounds. At some point, she stopped posting videos of Reef online. We don't know exactly when that happened, but it was probably when she realized how big he was getting. By then, Reef was way too big for her to handle. But rather than calling animal services to come capture him, she kept him in a small enclosure behind her house. I guess she thought she could hide Reef forever, but she couldn't. Eventually, her neighbors started noticing the big alligator and reported her to the authorities. On August 18, 2023, 2 officers from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission came to Julia's house. Their names were Carlos Santiago and Justin D. Thomas. Carlos was a 45-year-old veteran who had worked with FWC for 17 years. He was well-trained and had handled countless alligators. Particular assignments seemed routine, so he wasn't worried. Before going inside, the officers warned Julia that it was illegal to keep Reef as a pet, and told her that they would need to take him away. Julia knew that this day might come, but she still felt sad when it finally did. She said goodbye to Reef and watched as the officers approached him. First, everything seemed to be going well. The plan was to use a catch pole to grab Reef's snout and a set of bolt cutters to remove the zip ties on his jaws. But after Carlos got into the enclosure, things went horribly wrong. Here's what happened next in Carlos's own words. We went into the enclosure and the alligator immediately charged us. I tried to get out, but it grabbed onto my foot and pulled me in. I yelled for help and Justin dove into the enclosure to try and help. The alligator kept biting my foot and rolled around in the water with me. It dragged me under the water and I lost consciousness. That statement was part of Carlos's official report. He had given it to his boss after the incident. Now, before reading further, please consider subscribing to our channel. If you enjoy true crime and thriller stories, it really helps us out. Thank you. When Carlos lost consciousness, Justin dove into the enclosure to save him. But when he did, the alligator latched onto his partner's foot and dragged him underwater. Both officers were now missing, and nobody knew where they were. As it turned out, Reef had bitten off one of Carlos' legs and was trying to bite off the other. Fortunately, the struggle didn't last long. After a few seconds, Reef released Carlos and vanished into the bushes. That's when the officers' backup arrived. 2 more FWC officers jumped into the enclosure to help, but by then it was too late. Carlos was gone. They only found his shoes in the water. As for Justin, he managed to make it to the shore, but he needed medical attention. One of the officers helped him into his patrol car and drove him to the nearest hospital. Meanwhile, an air crew flew Carlos's remains to Bayfront Health Hospital in St. Petersburg. At the same time, a massive manhunt began. Authorities searched everywhere for Reef, but they didn't find him. It wasn't until 24 hours later that they received a tip from one of Julia's friends. She told them that Reef was still in the enclosure behind Julia's house. When the FWC officers returned to the residence, they found Reef hiding in a corner. They quickly captured him and brought him out of the enclosure. Reef was then taken to a private property where they euthanized him. As for Justin, he was released from the hospital that same night. His injuries weren't life-threatening, but both men had lost a part of their lives. The one who had suffered the worst was Carlos's wife, Isabella, who had talked to her husband on the phone that morning. She had asked him when he would be home, and he had replied, "I'll be there soon." Then she heard him scream and the call disconnected. Isabella waited for hours, but Carlos never came home. Even though the government officials had done everything right, the public wasn't convinced. Many people believed that they should have captured Reef sooner, and some even blamed Julia for what had happened. But in reality, it wasn't anybody's fault. What happened to Carlos was simply a tragic accident. As FWC spokesman Gary Morse put it, "If you're going to keep an alligator as a pet, it's going to be your responsibility to humanely euthanize that alligator at the end of its life." And that's just what we did. Of course, nobody was thinking about putting Reef down at first. Everyone wanted to find him and put him in jail for what he had done. But since they never found him, they had no choice but to euthanize him when they finally tracked him down. During the investigation, the officers discovered that Reef hadn't just bitten off Carlos's leg. He had also crushed the bones in his foot and partially digested them. Nobody knows exactly why Reef attacked the officers, but they have some theories. The most likely explanation is that Reef recognized Carlos's foot as prey. Maybe he had seen Carlos feeding the alligators before and thought he was getting another snack. Then again, maybe Reef had always planned on biting the officers. Who knows? What we do know is that the second Reef grabbed onto Carlos's leg and dragged him underwater. He was beyond saving. Since the news broke, Julia has been receiving a lot of hate online. Many people are calling her selfish and irresponsible, but some are defending her. They say that the real blame lies with the officers who failed to capture Reef earlier. Even though the truth is somewhere in between, the fact is that Julia made a huge mistake by raising Reef. She knew that he was a wild animal, and she knew that he would eventually attack somebody. In a way, it was bound to happen. Julia probably thought that she could tame Reef because he had been raised in captivity, but according to experts, that wasn't true. Steve Sidgwick, the curator of the South Carolina Aquarium, told the New York Post, "You can't domesticate an alligator. You can't train them to become docile. They have an instinct to do what comes naturally." Steve believes that Reef's behavior was conditioned. He learned to be calm around Julia and her family, but he was still a predator. And that's the main lesson we need to take from this story. No matter how friendly an alligator seems, it will always be